Hi, I'm Rick Mason from the Mid-Michigan CFUG. Things have changed in the CF world a little bit since Murrow took down the open source, and people are looking at different solutions to be able to publish. And one of them is the Jamstack, which our old friend Ray Camden is going to educate us about tonight. You want to take over, Ray?
Absolutely, and thank y'all for inviting me back. If you hear any loud rumbling behind me, that's the thunder that apparently the gods have found out that I'm speaking at a CF user group. And not sure if y'all can hear that or not. So they're upset. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you can see my slide deck.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So my name is Ray Camden. I think most people in the room already know me, so it's a bit silly, but I'm thinking about the future YouTube watchers out there. I am a developer evangelist at Adobe as of about a month ago. I worked at Adobe about 5-6 years ago. This is my second time around. I'm not doing anything with ColdFusion. I'm working on our document services, so anything related to working with PDFs and working with Word documents and PowerPoints and doing conversions, stuff like that. We have a bunch of APIs and SDKs for Node, .NET, and other languages that I'm forgetting right now, but I just focus on the Node aspect of that. I am blogging at raymondcamden.com. I've been running my blog at different URLs or so since about 2003. It's no longer a ColdFusion blog, it's a Jamstack blog. And at some point tonight, I will be talking about that a bit. And if you're not following me on Twitter, you should absolutely follow me because I only tweet super serious technical stuff. So you should follow me for all the important information. Oops. And that thunder is getting louder and I'm not gonna panic. I will say I have one phobia and it's storms. But I'm inside, so my phobia is kind of like hovering around like 40% or so. If I do scream, forgive me. All right, so I'm going to start off by defining the term Jamstack. To be clear, yes, this is yet another marketing term. If you've been in technology for as long as I have, I know Rick as well, you're used to kind of, seeing these things coined. I can remember when the cloud came out and people made all kinds of jokes. When serverless came out, people made all kinds of jokes and people just kind of got over it and realized that, yes, these marketing terms, they kind of help because they give you kind of a basic, like a basic idea. If you say, hey, I'm using serverless or if I'm using the cloud, you have a basic idea of what you're talking about. This was previously known as the Jamstack. With the capital letters in there, with the J standing for JavaScript and the A for APIs and the M for markup. That will make a bit more sense later on. And that term actually came about after we used to talk about static sites. I started talking about static sites and static site generators a couple of years ago. And one of the issues is that I would talk about static sites and always say, hey, it's a static site, but you're still dynamic because of A, B, C, whatever. So one of the nice things about having a word like Jamstack is you're not doing the yes, but or yes, and. You don't kind of have to explain what it means once you actually get around to defining what the heck you're talking about. So the way that I define Jamstack, and I'm going to do the cardinal sin of presenters and actually read off the slide, but I do like this kind of short sentence. But to me, it's a way of building sites. So that could be websites, it could be brochureware, blogs, e-commerce sites, etc. That relies on pre-rendered dynamic content living in production as static assets, aka just files, that are enhanced with client-side JavaScript and APIs for interactivity. So you can almost think of it as like having ColdFusion on your desktop machine, and when you're done, having just plain files. So my old stack, and this was my stack for 10 plus years, is that I would have Apache up and running on my dev server. I'd have ColdFusion. I'd have MySQL or SQL Server, or even at one time Microsoft Access, believe it or not, because it was simple. But I would have all of these things running. And the nice thing about that is that it was really, really flexible and it was very powerful. So I knew that with ColdFusion and Apache and a database server, there was nothing that I couldn't do. Unfortunately, it was also quite a bit too powerful. So one of the things that I realized is that I would have my web server, I'd have an enterprise copy of ColdFusion, a nice copy of SQL Server, running for a site that would get maybe a few hundred hits a day, and with data that changed maybe once a month or so. So I had an extreme amount of power when I was really only using a little bit of that. So when we talk about static sites as a thing to build, or that's just like a term in general, this actually started quite a bit ago, over 10 years ago. The very first static site generator was released. And essentially, you can think of it as having a dynamic app server in development. Again, think about having ColdFusion or PHP or .NET on your local server. But when it's done, it actually outputs static files, just flat HTML that doesn't require an app server to run and process it and look for tags and things like that. So as like kind of a real world example of that, I will write some Markdown. If you don't know what Markdown is, it's kind of a shorthand language for HTML. At the simplest level, it does things like, hey, I have a blank line. That means a new paragraph. I also have some data, and that data could be a JSON file. It could be a JavaScript file. It could be a different, I almost did scream there. And again, I'm not sure if y'all are hearing the lightning. It's fun. You have some data of different forms, right? And then your static site generator is going to take this and it's going to merge this. It's going to combine this into HTML, and then I just deploy that. So now my new stack essentially gets rid of all of that and leaves me with just flat files, at least in production. And I want to be clear. Jamstack doesn't remove all of your dependencies, especially when we start talking about, adding those APIs and adding in the client-side code. Those are things that can still break. But when I look at this stack that's on screen here, I see three things that I don't have to worry about that I used to have to worry about. I mentioned earlier that my blog is Jamstack, and I have been running it since 2003. In 2014, 15 or so, I decided to give WordPress a try. I've been hearing, WordPress has been around for a long time. I knew it was a good platform. I'd run my own custom blogware for a very long time, and I just wanted something new. And I deployed WordPress, and it was a beautiful experience. It was really, really well done. And then it crashed the next day. And it turns out I had not configured it right. I had not configured PHP right. I don't know. I had screwed something up. And then I fixed it, and then it broke again. And then I fixed it, and it broke again. And that was really annoying. So part of what kind of got me into being happy about the Jamstack is that there was just less stuff for me to have to worry about, breaking at night. I could tell you, I would wake up and my WordPress server would have crashed like 4 or 5 hours earlier, and that just bugged the heck out of me. So in terms of static site generators that are out there are a lot of options. I will click on the first one and just kind of show you. This is a list of sites, and you can see this one has 460 of them. A slightly nicer one is staticgen.com. And it gives you things like how many GitHub stars and stuff like that. And this one only has 322. I mention this because much like people gravitate towards an app server, you may gravitate towards ColdFusion or PHP. You may gravitate towards a front-end framework like I really like Vue.js, and you may really like React. The same thing applies to the Jamstack as well. In fact, I have kind of a love-or-hate relationship with a lot of the ones I've tried. So I am going to show you one particular generator. I'm going to walk you through a few examples of working with it. If it doesn't strike you as something that you would want to do in terms of how it works, just keep in mind that there are a lot of options out there, and some may fit your needs better. I will say I started off with Hugo. Hugo is extremely fast, which was good for my blog because my blog is quite large. I switched to Jekyll when I didn't like the way Hugo did some stuff. I liked Jekyll, but Jekyll was very hard to install because it was Ruby based. And then I eventually ended up on one called 11. And this one just, like, for me, it hit all the right spots. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. All right, so some details about 11. The website is 11ty.io. I always tend to forget it. I end up Googling it half the time. And it's actually moved to 11.dev. I keep forgetting to update the slide deck, but that URL works as well. It is open source. Pretty much every static site generator option out there is going to be open source, but it's node-based. So I use Node all the time. You know, at least compared to Jekyll, the installation was quite a bit simpler. And in terms of the template languages it supports pretty much every single one out there. So I want you to imagine if you installed ColdFusion and you could write code in either ColdFusion or PHP or .NET. Now, most likely you prefer one, but maybe that language that you prefer, maybe there's a few edge cases where it doesn't work too well. Imagine if you could literally like just switch to PHP for like one file because it made the most sense there. So 11 kind of gives you that freedom to use the one that you like the most, to mix and match, although you shouldn't go crazy with that. But as a real world example, I did like Jekyll. I didn't like the install process. So Jekyll uses Liquid. When I switched to 11, I was able to reuse my existing Liquid knowledge. Liquid's pretty good, but not perfect. There was one page on my blog, and I could show this later, where Liquid would not have worked well. I just switched to EJS. EJS is a horrible looking template language, but it lets you do kind of gross things in it. So I was able to use EJS on that one page and just get things done. So, I guess the main point about all this is that 11 is extremely flexible, and I like not feeling constrained by my tools. So to install it, you can do npm install -g add 11/11. This is all on the docs. You do not have to know Node.js to work with 11. Knowing JavaScript will absolutely help you to do more powerful things, but you definitely can use 11 without any knowledge of Node, with seriously no knowledge of JavaScript if you're okay with things out of the box. But knowing a little bit of Node and knowing a little bit of JavaScript will definitely help you do some more advanced things. So once you have that done, you get a CLI, and it pretty much has like one command, 11. And what this will do is it will look in the current directory, it will parse your files, and it will output it to a folder called _site. So obviously the CLI allows you to modify that. I could tell it a different input folder. I could tell it a different output folder. But really, 11 is the command you'll use to build your site. And you can also use a second version, which is 11-serve. And all that does is fire up a server that will run and will reload for you, and you can test stuff. It's akin to starting up ColdFusion when you start your day. So I'm going to show a quick example of this. And too many folders. So I have a README file where I just dropped some simple text in there. It's just a markdown. It's in a folder called 11.1. And I'm going to go over to not this folder, to not this folder. Which folder am I going to use? I'm going to use this one. Get out of here. Demos. All right, let's see, 11.1. All right, and I can actually make this bigger for y'all. that's a little bit nicer. So there is my README file, and I'm going to clear out that site folder, confirm it's gone, and I'm going to run 11e. It's going to scan. It's going to run really, really fast because it has a grand total of 1 file. And then if I were to actually run 11e serve, I could hit localhost 8080 and look at that README file in all its HTML glory. He said localhost 8080. Oh, I know. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Yeah, so by default, I had 1 file named readme.md. 11e used that to make a determination of what URL to use. So in this case, it used readme/. 11e gives you control over that, but if you don't say what you want, ray.markdown will be, ray/, etc. If I go in here and change that markdown, because I am not that excited about my README, save it, go back and reload, it updates. So right now I have the most boring markdown processor ever. I'm going to go ahead and kill this. And instead, I'm going to show you a slightly more advanced example. Let's close this. We'll go into 11d2. And this is a liquid template. So I know this because it's index.liquid. And the way that liquid works is that it uses bracket for variables. So in this case, I'm using a variable page.date that I know is going to exist. It's going to be the date the file was created. And if I run 11d serve in that folder, 11d serve, back, reload. Oops, I used index, so this will be at my home page. And I could see this file was last updated on April 13th. I believe I get cloned this morning, so that would kind of make sense. And if I modify this, if I do a little liquid on the fly here, and again, if you've never seen this before, this should hopefully make some sense. My name is name. Back, reload. There's my name is Ray. And if I were to look at the output, again, an underscore site, and you could default that, it's just flat HTML. So I have something that's dynamic, and in this case, it's pretty much hard-coded, but my end result is just a flat HTML file. So that's real basic stuff. Let's kick it up. Let's kick it up a notch and start by talking about layouts. Layouts are things that I'll specify in my front matter, and I'll show you an example of what I mean by front matter in a second. They will come from one particular folder called _includes. Can use any templating language and can be chained. What I mean by that is that I could design a layout for my blog. So I put my header, and I put my footer, I load in my CSS and stuff like that. I could also define like a core layout for a blog post. And I could say, you know what, that blog post layout includes my main layout. So there's a chain from blog content to post layout to site layout. And you can make that as complex as you want. Now, when we say front matter, a typical thing for static site generators is to allow you to put metadata on top of a file. It usually has a 3- demarcation to kind of call it out. And typically it's in YAML. I'm not a huge fan of YAML for like complex data, but for simple like key value pairs, it's pretty simple to write. So in this case, I have 3 variables, layout, title, and something, and then 3 values. 11d is going to recognize that I have said layout, and it's going to try to put my page content in a file called something. So I have another example of this. Let me close out these files. By the way, this is all on a repository. I'll share that at the end. I have a index.md file, a markdown file, and I've specified a layout and a title. The content beneath here is just markdown stuff. When I said layout.liquid, 11e is going to look in _includes layout.liquid. And the only thing I did there was I think I took some bootstrap. So this is all bootstrap. I specify a title variable here, and this will act as a default in case a page doesn't specify it. I can then output my title there, and then in the middle, I have my page content. And that's essentially where the contents of the index files is going to be dropped in there. So if we run this, let me go to 11d3 and run 11d serve and go back and reload, I can see my layout and I can see my content. Now 11d has a hot reload feature, but in order for it to work, it needs a full HTML page. So it needs an HTML tag, a head part, a body part. My earlier demos didn't have that, but now that I have that in there, if I go in my Markdown and say part 1, aka 1, just make a slight change, save it, Alt tab back, the page actually reloaded for me. So that saves me a half second. I appreciate that. Just kind of keep in mind that this won't work until you actually have a real layout in place. So this is something that I did in ColdFusion a lot as well. I would make a custom tag that wrapped my content in that would spit out the header and footer. So it's very much the same type of technique. If I were to change from Bootstrap to another CSS library or whatever, I could change that one time and not really have to worry about the rest of the site. So let's kick it up one more notch. How about we actually add some data, right? Because again, most of my ColdFusion sites would have data of some sort. So you can create variables for your site. These variables can then be used anywhere. So like your name can be defined, etc. This can be defined in the front matter where I define my header. And I forgot to show you, but this title did work. My homepage, Greetings of the Boys of the Yard. I could also create file-based data as either a JSON or a JS file. And I could do that for a file, for a directory, or for a site. And basically what that means is I can create data that applies globally for my site, or I could create data that applies just to one particular directory, or I could do it just for one particular file. So 11d gives you a lot of different options. For global data, you'll store it again in a folder that's configurable. It's called _data. So let me show a few examples of that. Let me close up my existing ones. All right, so for 11d4, I have an index.liquid file. There's some basic layout on top. And then I have a little bit of code. Again, this is the liquid language. 11d allows me to use multiple different ones, where I'm going to iterate over data called cats. And this is an array of data. Each cat has an image, a name, and a gender. I also have a, hey, if you're interested in reaching out, hit us at this particular variable. So where this comes from is the data folder. I have two files. The file names correspond to the variable scope. So cats.json is where cats comes from in this code. And that site.email comes from site.json. Site.json is just a couple key value pairs, and cats.json is an array. And if I run this, 11d4, 11d serve, we could see this in action back here. There are my cats, and there is that email address. And if I were to go in here and say, I don't mind if people spam me, let's get rid of that. We'll save it. And the name was not Miss Luna, it was Queen Luna. Go back, and you can see it actually updated for me automatically. So I have data that's not dynamic. It's definitely hard-coded here. But again, my output is just plain HTML. This is the output folder, and you can see it there. So coming from the ColdFusion world, this to me is a lot like application.cfc variables. So things like site name and the contact, things that don't necessarily change. I can change it to a flat file, and it's pretty easy. But how about something a little bit more dynamic? I'm going to run this one first before I show how it works. 11 serve. You're up and running. Just reload this. All right, make this a little bit bigger. So here I have a home page, and I have a list of Star Wars films. This is actually dynamic. Let me show you how that works. Close up these folders, these files. All right, 1185, data folder. I have a films.js file, not JSON, but JS. And all I'm doing is hitting a Star Wars API to get that data, and I return just the array. And then when I have it, I can actually iterate over each one and then output the film. Now, that was a super simple example. But this, in a way, is an API-driven dynamic website that's just static HTML. Now, at this point, you could rightly ask, so, what happens if a new film gets released? And that would be a great question. So in a case like this, what I do is I think about my data. So films come out at a very defined schedule, even with COVID missing with things. It's not every minute. It's, next Star Wars film is Christmas 2022. So I have an idea of when my data is going to refresh. I could actually schedule a rebuild of my site. And I'll show you how easy that is later on. I could schedule a rebuild for the day before or the day of, so that my site would update and have the latest information. I could also schedule a hourly rebuild. My site of about 6,000 pages takes about 15 minutes to build. If I wanted to, I could rebuild it every single hour if I was an e-commerce site, for example, and needing to update products and things like that. You can also kind of combine things, right? So you can imagine, these films are not changing very often. What could be changing is the money that these films have made, right? People are still buying them on DVD. Heck, maybe they're buying them on VHS. I don't know. But these movies are still making money. I could actually combine this static data, because right now this is a static file. I could use client-side JavaScript to hit an API to just get the money earned for each of these films and load this when the client actually hits the web page. So they're getting the current list of products or films with part of the data being dynamic based on the exact second they hit it. So, I like to stress that even though this is a flat file in production, I can make it very fresh. I could update it again on a schedule, and I could combine it with client-side JavaScript to make parts of it a bit more unique. I'm working on an e-commerce site now that's how that works. This particular e-commerce site, they only add products every now and then, and they know when they do it, and they could trigger a rebuild. So it's totally fine for those products to be static in production. Each product, though, has up-to-date, information like number of orders, and the more people buy, the more they save. All of that I load dynamically via JavaScript. So it's a combination of static and dynamic. So there's a lot more that 11 could do. It does pagination really well, tagging. You can modify the template engine and do plugins. I definitely encourage you to look at it. This was the extremely quick introduction to 11. My blog is a large implementation of 11. It's all on GitHub, and you're welcome to look at that to see how I do things. So I talked a little bit just like a minute ago about bringing dynamic stuff back. Obviously, there's a way to do that. And there's things to handle forms, comments, search, pretty much everything that you can think of, including e-commerce, can be done with the Jamstack site. For forums, for example, you have Wufoo, you have Google Docs, you have FormKeep, you have Forum Spree, all kind of weird form name type things. Get Form, Form Cake that I'm seeing in my tab open there. And essentially, each of these services works a little bit different. I'll show you. Where did I have it? Oh, I know where I had it. I have an example. Localhost 4000 still running. Or did I kill it? Oh no, 4444. To show you an example, Google Forms, for example, allow you to use a nice Google site to lay out a form, and then basically they give you an embed. If we look at this code, there's my regular site content with CSS and all, and this iframe here is what Google gave me. I designed all of this on the Google website and dropped it in. And what's nice is that they could take this information could be emailed to you. It's just simple to use, and I'm pretty sure Google's infrastructure is going to be rock solid. If Google goes down, people way smarter than me are working on it. Other examples is that a lot of these services like FormCake, GetForm, and the other ones I mentioned, they give you a unique URL to point your form at. You can see this one right here, this long URL here. They give you this, and what they do is that they allow you to configure where to go when the form is submitted. So I'll build, contact.html or contact.markdown. I point my form at their service. They handle processing the form and either emailing it or doing things like Salesforce, all kinds of integrations. And then all they do is redirect back to my site. Now, a developer like you and I, if we have network tools open, we can see, oh, I was on RaymondCamden.com, and then for a second I was on getform.io, and now I'm back. Yeah, but for a casual user, they are never going to even recognize that change. So for example, I will show you my contact form, and mine's a little bit different, but I type in my name, email, just delete me, hit submit, and I end up with a thank you. So my form is actually using the serverless function on my host that handles taking that input and sending it to my email box and then redirecting the user back here. And that's how all of these services would essentially look to a casual user. They don't know that you're doing weird things behind the scenes. So the fact that there's so many options like this makes me happy, because I first got into dynamic web programming back in the old days, writing Perl CGI scripts, and literally it was just contact forms again and again and again. So I did that a lot in ColdFusion as well, and I'm happy to not write that code to process forms. For comments, you have options as well. The big one obviously is Discuss. People use Facebook comments. A lot of places I don't like the Facebook comments. I try to avoid them, but that is an option. And for like a lot of media companies with a strong Facebook presence, being able to embed your comments on your website and have it tied to Facebook could be a good thing. There are services like Commento and Fast Comments. I will say both of these seem to be in kind of response to Discuss. A lot of people aren't necessarily happy with some of the privacy implications of Discuss. I'm kind of neither here nor there on that, but they're good alternatives. And of course, a lot of people are not doing comments, like myself. I had comments for 20. I've been around 18 years to blog. 17 of my 18 years, I recently switched to a option called web mentions, and so I'll show an example of that. But as an example of Discuss, I'm pretty sure everyone here has seen Discuss, but it has kind of a pretty defined view on the bottom. You can see this is one of my websites that never really took off. That last comment was 6 years ago. But what is kind of nice about Discuss is that once you sign in, you're signed into every Discuss implementation on every site ever. So that is pretty darn convenient. Discuss does have a free tier, but I find their sites to be lacking quite a bit. If you do decide to go with Discuss, it is the easiest thing to do. They will just give you something that you literally just kind of drop in. You could still include dynamic aspects. So this is some liquid code where I have used a variable for for a hard-coded variable. It is easy to use Disqus, but there are options out there. Search is another big one. You can use Google custom search engine. Google knows a thing or two about search. I used to use this option on my blog. I got tired of the advertising. Now I have advertising on my blog, but I would do the search, and the first like 4 results would be ads. And I'm okay with 1 or 2, but like seeing 4 one day just kind of made me go crazy. Lunar is an entirely JavaScript-based solution. That means it's entirely in the client side. It's a simple to use solution, but keep in mind that it's only going to work on your smaller websites because it does have to load essentially an index of your site's content in the client-side browser. That sounds scary, but I've used Lunar on a platform that for a company I used to work with. We had 50 or so pages of documentation, and we were able to use Lunar. And I think we indexed like the first 3 paragraphs or so of each page, and it was enough to create a decent enough server search solution. Algolia is interesting in that in some ways it works a bit like Verity used to in ColdFusion and Solar, I believe now. It is a search server, so I send my content to them. I send the full content, and then Algolia has an API that I can hit to do a search, and they do all the stemming and the word matching, the fuzzy matching, and all that. Lunar does that as well, but Algolia, all that's happening on their server, and to me, that was the best solution for my blog because I had so much content. Lunar would not have worked. So as a demo of that, I'll go back to JavaScript Cookbook, but this is using Lunar, where all the content is actually on the client side. And I think I have maybe 30 or so articles on this website, and it worked fine, good enough. I could switch to email. You can't really tell. This email should work. I'll have to test this later. I won't rush on it because no one hits the site anymore. But this is an example of Lunar, and this is also on one of my GitHub repositories if you want to take a look at it, or you can just view source. Actually, you know what? Let's do that. As that code, if I remember, was right here. Yeah, so I literally fetch a JSON index. That's my content. I create an index from it. And then later on, I could search it by just asking the index to search against a search term. So this is like 25 lines of code or so, pretty darn easy to use. And all I had to do was tell my site-side generator to create a JSON file of my content to be searched. My Algolia example is my blog. And if we go here and search for ColdFusion, this is using JavaScript. It's hitting the Algolia server, and it's giving me, I think, the first 50 responses. I did not do pagination on my search. Algolia absolutely supports pagination, so I could have done a nice, click here for next. I could have done the highlighting in there. Actually, it does it a little bit if Adobe ever kills ColdFusion. So it's actually kind of highlighting the search term. If I do Star Wars versus Star Trek, Algolia can do whatever it needs to parse that and bring back the right results. So I'm sorry.
So can 11D create the JSON file or whatever that you're consuming with these different search engines?
Absolutely. So one of the reasons I like 11E is that it outputs HTML by default. But if you want to output JSON, then you use Liquid, you use Handlebars, whatever template language you want, you output valid JSON, and 11E just creates the JSON file. So yeah, it definitely can. So for my site, I'm not doing that because I'm sending my data to Algolia, but very similar example, if I remember right. Nope, use the link, Raymond. Yeah, so my RSS feed, this is XML generated by 11E, and 11e did not care. I told it, I made sure to output XML. I told it what URL to use, in this case, feed.xml, and it just outputted for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll say, out of the static site generators, the biggest are definitely Hugo and Jekyll. Those are ones you'll hear the most. One of the reasons I left Hugo is that it was very hard for me to output XML and then output JSON. Apparently, it's much easier now, but I've moved on, so it was too late for me. But that's just something to keep in mind. I will say, again, my site builds in about 15 minutes, and that's all 6,000. I don't run all 6,000 locally. When I'm working, I'm writing a blog post and I'm previewing it in my browser, I tell 11D to ignore like 99% of my content. So it reloads very fast, it renders results very fast. Again, it's only 15 minutes in production. Hugo would probably do my site in about a minute, if not quicker. But to me, I didn't care about the 15 minutes because that's only when I publish a new blog post, and I'm fine waiting a few minutes before I tweet about it. And if I do something smaller, like fix a typo somewhere, then it's actually about 5 minutes. So I'm fine waiting for that to have the benefit of a nice engine locally. So there's definitely more that you could do. Calendars. Google Calendar also has a copy this HTML block and drop it in as an embed option. There's also a very good jQuery plugin called Full Calendar, which also integrates with Google Calendar, so you got the best of both worlds. There's definitely e-commerce options. Like I said, I'm working on a Jamstack site now where you can buy a product. I use Stripe to handle the credit card, to handle the authentication, to hit the credit card and all that. And any API out there, certainly you can just use in your code. You can either use it like I did in that earlier example, when I build my site by hitting the Star Wars API. So that's not client-side code, that's just at build time. Or I can use the API in client-side code. And it gets even better when you work with things like serverless. So some APIs, for example, require you to have a key. And if you use that key in client-side code, people can see it, steal it, and use the key and go crazy. One of the common use cases for serverless for me was literally, I want to hit an API, I want to hide my key. I also want to transform the data a bit because the API returns 10 things and I need like 2. So I can return less data to my client. So I've used serverless for a proxy for APIs a lot of times, and that was really handy with that. Now, in terms of hosting, because it's flat files, you can use the same web server that you use for ColdFusion or PHP. You can just use IIS, you can use Apache, you can literally just copy the output from 11e or any other generator right into your normal web server. You can also use some of the platform as a service solutions, Bluemix, Azure. You could use an Amazon EC2 instance, which is a bit of an overkill, or use a file-based server like Amazon S3. Amazon S3 lets you click a button to turn a folder into a website. Azure has that as well. I think maybe Google, not sure. Now, on top of that, there's also companies that are kind of focused on working with the Jamstack. There's Versal, there's Netlify. Again, Azure has an option, and Cloudflare has recently released their solution as well. I like Versal as my number 2 choice, but it's a good service. Zero configuration, and what that means is that if it detects that I have an 11e based site, it knows 11e, it knows how to run it, and it knows where the output is, and it's really easy to deploy a site with Vercel. You get free SSL. If you've ever had to buy a cert, get a cert, download the cert, tell Apache how to use it, that's painful. So having Vercel do that for you is really nice. They have a CDN, it's automatic. They have integration with GitHub and GitLab. And they have a serverless option as well. And if you want, you can look at the pricing. They do have a decent free tier. Netlify is the #1 pick for me. Again, free SSL and CDN. That's just automatic. GitHub and GitLab integration. So as an example, my blog is on GitHub. When I commit a new blog post or a typo fix or whatever, I commit to GitHub. I don't go to Netlify at all. Netlify watches my repo. It knows when it changes. It will get the latest code and it will do what it needs to deploy. Excuse me. This is why you bring a big cup of water when you present. It also has an integrated serverless solution. It has a form solution baked in, so you don't have to do any work at all to process forms. It has a basic identity solution, so you can work with users, and it has an analytics solution as well. And then, to me, Netlify is really the gold standard. You could check out the pricing, but let me show you a quick demo. And I'm just going to show you my dashboard. So I have my blog, and I have a bunch of little testing things as well. If we look at my blog, I could look at the deploys. I blogged yesterday, last night, and I fixed a typo on April 1st, essentially. I could also preview deploys. So if I want to build and not go to production, Netlify will give me a way to look at that. I could see how my deploys are going, and they've all succeeded, but if they failed, it's really called out. You can see I am averaging about 20 minutes, actually, not 15, but like my typo fix was 6 minutes. So just to be clear, in that 18 minutes, my site was not down. Netlify will instantly make the new version available when it successfully deploys. If anything goes wrong, then it will tell me, and it definitely won't break the live site. So during those 20 minutes, nothing is going wrong. I could also roll back if I needed to. I mentioned analytics. If you follow me on Twitter, I tend to harp on how Google Analytics is kind of hard to read. I really like their simple charts here: page views, visitors, locations, even the top pages. The only thing I will point out is that the analytics feature is a paid feature. It's an add-on. So Netlify has a couple tiers, including a free tier, but analytics is always a paid upgrade. I will say the biggest issue is that the max it gives you is 30 days. And that's really a bummer because like if I want to see how my site did over the last year, I can't use Netlify. I was very happy with it until I realized that. So I had taken Google Analytics off my site. I put it back in because I really want longer data for my site. So I'm using 2 analytic solutions for my site right now, and I'm okay with that. I really wish they would modify this to have a bit more time. If that makes sense. More resources, and again, I will share the output from this. And I'm shocked I don't have it on the slide deck, but if you go to Manning, the Jamstack book, yes, if you go to manning.com, there's a book that I'm writing with Brian Rinaldi, another old Adobean, called the Jamstack book. You can buy it now. It's in pre-release. That's a thing that Manning does. Whereas chapters get released and edited, they will release updates. I believe 5 chapters are. Oh, I hate stuff like that. Go away. I think 6 of 10 chapters are available. So it's if you buy right now, obviously you will get updates as the new versions come out. So you're kind of essentially buying a beta version of a book, but you will get the final version. And in these 10 chapters, Brian and I cover everything from different examples like blogs, e-commerce sites, etc. I go deeper into building dynamic parts back into sites and talk about serverless. It's a great book that you can pick up right now if you would like. And with that, I am open to any questions. I know we got a small group tonight, so y'all can ask anything at all you could possibly think of.
I think that was a dare for you there, Rick. He said, ask anything you want to. So did you really pee on yourself when the thunder hit really loud? Hang on, we're still recording this. I better cut this. Yeah.
I did a little bit, yes. It's actually been quiet for like the last hours. So I will be honest and say I am looking at the radar real quick while we're at a pause here.
Yeah, we heard it. I was like, man, it was pretty rough down there. Plus, you guys had a pretty big storm not too long ago, I think, that ripped through some stuff.
Yeah, we had 2 hurricanes within like a month. I'm done. Louisiana's a great state, but once our youngest child is 18, we are hauling ass to the northwest where there's only volcanoes.
I understand. I really appreciate the presentation. I've been preaching it for years. Rick and Nick have probably heard me say it. It's like, why? I mean, I remember when Mira was around, and I can't remember. It's probably Nick trying to push me into it. I'm like, it's gonna read the database. It's gonna make a call, and in the next 11 months, that page is gonna be the same. That content would be the same. This is like a waste to me. Like, what are we doing? People are totally against me because I've always been like, it's files. They serve up really fast. And then when I saw Mira going from the standpoint of like, well, we're not doing the database. We kind of like do this transition where you put it in here, but then it spits it out to a flat file, and that's what gets served up. I'm like, well, you should have been doing that right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. I totally get, like, I understand where you're going. And even like our site now, it's like, we hardly call the database, and there's so much stuff that's cached or made flat. It's kind of crazy, Yeah. So I agree with where you're going.
I actually have an example for 11 that uses MySQL to drive a blog. And so it's database driven, but it's static. But you could tie that up to, when I add a new content to that table, just automatically fire off a build.
Yeah, that really has me thinking about stuff. I mean, we constantly deal in JavaScript and, APIs, and hardly ever in the database. But I hear what you're saying as far as like the server pane and why deal with this. You can fire up anything, Apache, IIS, and you want to server files, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking even from a security standpoint, like, well, my concerns be there is no SQL injection because it's a flat file, I don't want to take up all this time, Rick. I'm sure you got something to add in there.
No, that's fine. I know that how at certain times, like football season, basketball season, your server is overloaded. It could basically run more traffic through one server. Ray, I was going to ask you, am I remembering wrong? Because I don't know a lot about this, but didn't 11D offer their own hosting service in addition to the software?
No.
Okay.
No, but the guy who built it is working for Netlify.
Okay.
Netlify doesn't do anything special for 11D. So my site obviously works on there, but they don't have one thing they don't have compared to Vercel. They don't have the zero config type thing. I had to go spend 1 minute typing in what the build command is in my Netlify dashboard for my site. So it was very easy to do. I do wish they would steal the feature from Vercel to make it zero config.
Okay. I'm interested also in what Cloudflare is doing. They didn't make it real easy to get started, and I think it's been made easier now if you can post to the database, which is I think an API. I haven't had time to play with it, but it'll just serve the files up out of the database. But it's at 300 locations around the world, so it's even though it's out of a database, it's fast.
Yeah, they have both the Jamstack hosting, they have serverless, and they have analytics as well. I tried their solution for a little while. It was okay, not enough to make me use it for good.
I created a bookmark folder. I keep running across stuff about them, and I've watched some of their videos, and again, I don't have time with the startup, to play with everything like I have in the past, just to get a little taste of it. I guess maybe I got to do a meeting on it, and that'll give me a justification. I have to work on it for a week because I got a meeting to do. So, Nick, do you got any questions?
Yeah, have you tried or set up anything with like GitHub where using like GitHub Actions or the CI/CD pipeline or things like that to have it build the pages pretty much in GitHub to push elsewhere, or is that not really a common workflow that you see?
I have not. I know both Vercel and Netlify, they do it on their side. So they get your repo, they clone it, they run the build command. Surely it's possible. So I will say GitHub Pages supports Jekyll. So you could do Jekyll-ish stuff in there. I'm not sure how well it supports it, but you can have kind of a Jamstack-ish experience with that if you want.
Yeah, because I'm kind of thinking like, okay, you post your source code or whatever to a GitHub repo, and when you commit, then it goes and runs a Docker image that like compiles everything for you. But I wasn't sure if that was common or not, or if I'm over just thinking it.
Maybe you could, but I know it won't run GitHub won't do a server outside of GitHub Pages, as far as I know.
Okay.
Is 11D written in Node?
Yes.
Okay. Can't remember whether you said that or not.
Yeah, and you don't have to know Node at all. That one example I showed kind of quick of loading Star Wars films, that was a Node script, but it was pretty simple. So you could, if you barely know it, you can copy and paste somebody else's example and modify it, which I've done throughout my entire career.
Yeah, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank Mr. Camden very much, and we're going to have this on our YouTube channel, and I'll be posting it on social media, and I'll give it to Ray, so he has far more followers on Twitter than I do, probably Facebook as well.
I just want to know, who's Mr. Camden? It's not me.
Okay.
Great, thanks.